Today, we're pleased to have Ryan Hass, one of the most respected, fair, and balanced China policy thinkers in Washington, D.C. Ryan is a senior fellow at Brookings Institution, a former China director at the White House National Security Council from 2013 to 2017, and author of Stronger: Adapting America's China Strategy in an Age of Competitive Interdependence. Welcome, Ryan.
Wenchi, thank you for giving me an opportunity to be with you on this show.
Of course. Has the U.S. changed its policy toward Taiwan from strategic ambiguity to clarity? For the fourth time, President Biden said the U.S. will defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. However, each time, the White House walked back by saying the U.S. policy hasn't changed. It's quite confusing to people that the White House and the president are saying two different things. What is your interpretation?
Well, Wenchi, my general view is that when the president says something four times, it's not a gaffe, it's a statement of conviction. It reflects his strong feelings and views of what is necessary. And we should take him at his word that this is what he means. He means that the United States should be prepared to intervene if there is a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. I've been struck by Beijing's reaction. It's been more muted than I think many people would expect. I think part of that has to do with the fact that President Biden's words really just validate their assumptions. They feel like President Biden is saying the quiet part out loud. Of course, they expect that the United States would intervene in the event of conflict. They have no alternative. They have to be prepared for that scenario. But to the final part of your question, Wenchi, I think it's really important. It troubles me that the president and his staff appear to be on different pages on this critical question. There are a few issues in the world where words matter more than Taiwan, and it's important that we get it right. And I worry that having the White House staff constantly walk back the president's statements suggests that the president and his team are not on the same page.
If you were still in the White House, I mean, this seems to be the reality now. It's very clear. So is there a need to still keep it this ambiguous, or we should just make it very clear?
Well, this is a question that many people outside of government are debating, this distinction between strategic ambiguity and strategic clarity. It's not a debate that I sense has much salience inside the administration. The Biden administration is very focused on doing what it feels is necessary to keep things stable and to protect America's interest and to strengthen its relationship with Taiwan. And the reality is that the only way that you could possibly have what is called strategic clarity would be to establish a mutual defense treaty with Taiwan. Otherwise, this will depend upon the words of each president. Our presidents rotate through every 4 or 8 years. And so short of that, there really isn't a lot of value in sort of prejudging or predetermining how the United States would respond to a future hypothetical scenario.
Your book argues that competitive interdependence should be the new framework of discussion of the U.S.-China relations. Tell us, what do you mean?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk briefly about the book. The idea of competitive interdependence is intended as a framing device to help understand how two large, powerful, proud countries relate to each other in the world. It's not a formula for solving problems in the relationship, nor is it an effort to try to diminish the level of friction or tension that exists in this highly competitive relationship. But it is intended to try to highlight that there are various aspects of the relationship. Competition surely is a big part of the relationship. I think that's sort of the core of the relationship right now. But alongside that competition, there is a very deep, thick interdependence that exists. And if we only view the relationship through a narrow lens of competition, we will lose sight of some of the broader issues in the relationship that also need to be managed. So, for example, there are zero-sum issues like Taiwan, where there really isn't any space for compromise between America's priorities and China's preferences. But there also are a lot of zeros or positive sum or negative sum issues where each country will both either be affected positively or negatively based upon what happens. So public health, climate change would be examples of this. And having a policy that takes a more holistic, encompassing view of the overall relationship through a framework of competitive interdependence allows us to see both of these types of issues alongside each other. Ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to suggest, Wenqi, is that the purpose of government is not to compete with other countries. The purpose of government is to provide for the health, the safety, the prosperity of its people. And by being able to differentiate some of these issues and deal with them each on a case-by-case basis, hopefully we'll put ourselves in a better position to be able to deliver on that priority that government has for its people.
I think I want to dig deeper a little bit on this. I think especially when you were in the government, that was kind of a different dynamics between the two countries. And it was still possible to see areas for collaboration and areas where we, basically US and China just see, not eye to eye on those issues, including Taiwan, as you mentioned. But increasingly, it seems that both countries are trying to package issues together.
Well, I guess what I would say, Wenqi, is that here's the truth, the inescapable truth. The United States is not going anywhere. China is not going anywhere. Global challenges that confront both of us are not going anywhere either. We will be worse off if we're incapable of finding ways to coordinate our respective efforts to tackle these common challenges. The United States will suffer, China will suffer, the people of the world will suffer. And so it's not really out of goodwill or amity. It's really just sort of clear-eyed realism and identification of where our interest lies that we have to find ways to disaggregate and differentiate these issues. I agree with your observation that from the Trump administration onwards until now, a lot of issues have sort of been packaged together into a messy ball where it's just become a big knot and nothing is possible. I think that's a reflection of where the overall relationship is. The relationship really is in a perilous state right now between the United States and China. And we're not going to prevail over China. China is not going to impose its will on the United States. Ultimately, the United States and China are going to have to find ways to coexist amidst this intensifying competition. And they're going to have to find ways to deal with these problems that confront both of our countries if government is going to serve its purpose of protecting the safety, welfare, and prosperity of its people. And so it's not that I want things to be rosy and warm and happy between the United States and China. It's that I want the United States to be able to serve the interests of its people. And I think that having some semblance of functionality in the US-China relationship is important for our ability to do that.
One of the things that you discuss in your book that I found fascinating and completely agree with is America needs to be more confident. I think in the past, we were able to see the separation between policy and politics, but increasingly it's hard to tell one from the other. And American anxiety with itself is really reflected in the foreign policy now, and most pronounced in its policy toward China. And I think that's what you're arguing in the book. Basically, the US needs to know its own strengths, right? To build on those strengths. And I like the phrase you're using, which is China is not really 10 feet tall. But if you look at the US domestic politics right now, American public is not necessarily convinced that Washington, D.C. can really lead effectively, not just on the world stage, but also to unite the nation. So that is a very worrying trend. And that to me is a much bigger problem that Washington, D.C. may have to deal with before it can talk about foreign policy or policy toward China. What is your view?
Well, I very much agree with the sentiment of your question and statement. The reality is that no country can be stronger on the world stage than it is at home. And the foundation of strength is really sort of social cohesion and economic power. That is what funds our national labs, spurs our innovation, supports our military installations around the world, builds a social safety net that allows our people to grow, be healthy, and prosper. And so we have to start there. The most powerful thing the United States can do to compete with China, frankly, is to invest in itself and to find its friends abroad. And I think that we are making some progress. I know that we live in the United States, and every day when you open the newspaper or watch the news, it looks messy. It feels jarring. But the truth is that our system of government has produced more wealth and generated more power on the world stage than any other system of government in the history of humanity. And we need to keep that in mind. For all of our warts and defects, there is something to the system that we have. And I think that, a predictable legal system that protects the rights of its people is a powerful magnet for the best and the brightest people from around the world to want to come live, work, and study in the United States. We need to nurture that. That is a asymmetric advantage for the United States.
Speaking of domestic politics shaping foreign policy, the US Congress has always played a very significant role in US policy toward Taiwan. We're seeing that in the Taiwan Policy Act that is currently under discussion. While it's watered down after last week's Foreign Relations Committee meeting, do you see more congressional support for Taiwan in the future? When I say more, it's not just arms sales, but more around symbolic support for Taiwan's sovereignty, be it name change from Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office to Taiwan Representative Office, or potentially Senate confirmation of American Institute in Taiwan's director appointment, etc.
Well, it's a really important question, and it's a timely question as well. My general sense to the first half of your question is that Congress traditionally has played a very large role on Taiwan issues, and I expect it will continue to do so. And I think that there are a couple of factors for this. One is that there is just simply strong, deep, passionate bipartisan support in Congress for Taiwan. That's a good thing, and I encourage it to continue. The other is that I think that there's a habit or a pattern in the U.S. Congress of focusing on issues that it feels the executive branch is under emphasizing. So, for example, when there are human rights issues in China and Congress feels like the executive branch, the president, is not putting enough focus on those issues, it will fill that void, fill that vacuum, and really put a lot of attention on those issues, as it did with issues in Xinjiang over the past couple of years. Mm-hmm. The same is true for Taiwan. I think that when Congress feels like the United States government, the executive branch, is not adequately focused on the threat or challenge that Taiwan faces, it will raise its voice and raise the amount of attention and emphasis on Taiwan issues. That is a pattern that has occurred historically, and I expect it will continue to do so.
So do you think it is getting harder for the US to sort of have its Western allies to be fully aligned with the US sort of rhetoric towards China?
Well, Winchie, I think that if the United States sets it as its baseline or expectation that countries will adopt a framing of democracies versus autocracies, or accept a premise that there is a great power competition that defines international relations today, we are setting ourselves up for a certain degree of disappointment. Because the reality is that that's what the relationship looks like when you sit in Washington or in the United States, not necessarily in Brussels or Paris or Berlin or Tokyo or Singapore or anywhere else. So we need to understand that each country has its own interests, its own concerns about Chinese behavior, and they don't all map identically with our own. But that doesn't mean that we can just sort of put our hands up in resignation. Rather, we have to find areas where we have overlapping interests with our partners and be as sort of creative and ambitious as we can in identifying where those opportunities are, and then aligning our efforts around those issues, as well as our messages to the Chinese on those issues. And I think if you use that as the starting point, you can actually develop a pretty ambitious agenda pretty quickly around issues like public health, clean energy technology, climate change, trade and investment, and also technology innovation.
Well, we've talked a lot about the US. I think the last question has to go to China. Tell us what you think is the significance of the upcoming 20th Party Congress and China's current challenges. Where is China headed?
Well, that's a big question, but I think that the Party Congress in mid-October will select China's leaders, obviously, for the next 5 years. The wide expectation is that President Xi will stay at the top, but the question mark is who will join him at the pinnacle of power at the top of the Chinese Communist Party. And that remains a question mark. And I think that a lot of people will look at the selection of Politburo Standing Committee members to gain a sense of how much influence or dominance President Xi has over.
And what is your prediction, if you can share?
Well, my expectation is that President Xi will probably get a lot of what he wants. I think that he has established a pretty high degree of influence over decisions, and I think that he's spent the last 10 years erasing any challenges to his authority. And so I think that it will be broadly reflective of his preferences. The big question that I have, though, and I think many others have, is will there be course corrections after the Party Congress in China's domestic and external policies? Because it's pretty broadly understood that China's not on a great track right now. Their COVID lockdowns are highly disruptive. Their debt and demographics are worsening. Their economy is decelerating. Their relations with every developed country simultaneously are worsening right now. This is not a report card of success, in other words, but it's not clear whether or not China is capable of doing what it's done in the past, of course correcting and adjusting based upon the feedback it's receiving, or if China is just locked on a course that will stay constant as long as President Xi remains in power. So that's the big question mark that I think a lot of observers have, and will be trying to use the Party Congress and its aftermath to begin to measure.
I think we will know next month and the months beyond to see where is really China going to look like and the general direction. But thank you so much, Ryan, today for sharing with us your thinking in terms of the new framework of the most consequential relationship in the 21st century through the framework of competitive interdependence. As always, thank you for your very balanced and fair view. Take care.
Thank you.